Hello, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you. Welcome to a Spider Strategies monthly educational webinar. This month of August 2018, we'll be covering using Connect and Excel import files to build and update scorecards in Scoreboard. My name is Tom Keating. I'm the Training and Customer Experience Consultant here at Spider Strategies. And before we move on, I'd like to invite anybody and all of you to take note of my email address of tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com, and feel free to communicate with me at any point in time regarding questions, issues, or needs you have from us at Spider Strategies. Looking at today's agenda, it's a fairly simple 3-point agenda. First, we will cover a broad Connect introduction. Who, what, where, why, and how. But, folks, not necessarily in that order. Next, we'll move on to using Connect and Excel import file to create a scorecard. And last, using Connect and Excel import files to update a scorecard. With regard to the agenda, let's start with the first one, a Connect introduction. The idea behind this is that there might be someone in the viewing or listening audience who is completely unfamiliar with Spider Strategies Connect, and we want to just tell you what it is, who, what, where, why, how to use. First of all, what is Connect? Quite simply, it's Spider Strategies' proprietary import utility for Scoreboard. Why would you use Connect? Well, to create scorecards in Scoreboard via an import process, or to update existing scorecards in Scoreboard, again via an import process. You can, of course, achieve either of these within Scoreboard itself manually, but the premise behind using Connect is to simplify your life, do a little bit of work on the front end to create appropriate import files, and make life faster and easier in terms of getting scorecards created or updating scorecards when it's time to update them. Who uses Connect? Any licensed user who is responsible for creating or updating scorecards in Scoreboard and has appropriate privileges to create or update scorecards. When would you use Connect? Again, quite simply, whenever you need to create a scorecard or update a scorecard in Scoreboard and want to do either of those things via an import process as opposed to doing them manually. Where do you access Connect? It's again quite a simple addition to your URL. You access the same Scoreboard URL that you use to open and work with Scoreboard, and simply add a /connect to the end of that URL, and you will be brought into Connect. And lastly, how is Connect used? Well, to address the how of it all, that's the meat of this presentation, so let's jump back into our agenda. Back in the agenda, of course, our next item is to use Connect and Excel import file to create a scorecard. The goal of this how step of the process is to create and populate a scorecard like the following example for a mythical utilities company. I'll exit our presentation screen and move into a browser where I have already opened Scoreboard and have landed at the Scoreboard homepage. I'll navigate in the black navigation pane on the left into the Scorecards section of Scoreboard, where we have an existing organization called Utility Company for Training. This organization has an existing scorecard called Utility Scorecard that is comprised of 4 different KPI areas: financial, customer, internal processes, learning and growth, and so on. I'll click the Expand All button at the bottom to easily give us visibility to the breadth and depth of this existing scorecard within Scoreboard. Again, within the financial KPI area, we see that we have an objective of institutionalized energy and fuel savings, another objective to provide full-time trained and certified employees. Within the customers area, we have validate, energy performance, and so on. And underlying each of those objectives, we also have measures. This is literally the scorecard that we are going to create via an import process through Connect. We also, later in the demonstration, will show you how to populate the scorecard, very much like this scorecard is populated throughout the year of 2018 with measures and values at the KPI level, the objective level, the KPI area level, and the scorecard level. So just take note, if you would please, of this scorecard and its structure of, again, a utility scorecard, a financial KPI area, a customer KPI area, internal processes, and learning and growth, each again supported by objectives and underlying KPIs or measures. Let's jump back into our presentation and forge ahead. Let's give you just a quick visual introduction to Connect. So what does Connect look like, and how does it really work? When you log into Connect, you're first brought to the Connect homepage. This is a pristine image of a Connect homepage that has 0 import processes yet defined, although it provides the opportunity to, of course, create a new import. And under the data sources, for this class, we're focusing purely on Excel or CSV files as the data source. In next month's webinar, we will be covering other data sources such as databases, SOAP data sources, and so on as potential optional other data sources that you can employ via Connect. But for now, in this class, we're focusing on Excel as the source of the import file for a Connect import process. If you click on the Create New Import button under Imports, you'll be brought to the Edit Import phase of the Connect setup. In this case, it's really easy. You're setting up 4 basic steps to define, in this case, an import process that creates a scorecard. First, you give it basic information. Next, you move on to defining source data. Third, you define the destination that the import process needs to know. And lastly, any mapping that is required or necessary. The next logical question that people often ask is, well, what does a Connect scorecard structure import file look like? Here is a screen capture of a prototypical scorecard structure import file in Excel. You'll see that in column A, we have a scorecard column. B is a key performance area. C is objectives. D is KPIs. From column D out to the right, the remaining columns all pertain to the KPIs and provide information or properties for each unique KPI. With that said, let's show you a real-world example of the file that we will be literally using to create or recreate that utility scorecard that we just saw a few minutes ago. Again, you see under the scorecard column the name of utility scorecard, under key performance area, financial, customer, internal processes, everything that you saw back in the scorecard that we looked at a few minutes ago within Scoreboard. Similarly, the objectives. In column D, the various KPIs that we viewed within our scorecard. And then again, out to the right of that, all the unique properties of each of those KPIs. Please briefly take note that the KPIs have different, for instance, scoring type properties. In column H, some of them are goal only, some are green and red flag, some are 4-color orange, and so on. So even further to the right, under columns L out through Q, we have different requirements of information for each of those KPIs in terms of setting goals and thresholds and levels that pertain to each unique KPI. So this again is just a view of the import file that we will be using in just a few minutes to actually create a scorecard via Connect in Scoreboard. Let's just take a few minutes to preview each of the details of the 4 steps to creating a scorecard with the import file that we just saw in a little bit more detail. The first step of the 4-step process is to provide basic information. In this case, you're simply giving the import process a name. You're defining what the data source is for that import process. What type of import is it? Whether are you creating a scorecard? Are you updating a scorecard? Are you updating initiatives? Are your 3 basic choices. And then, of course, lastly, you point to the specific file that contains the information that you aspire to upload or import into Scoreboard. In the second step of the process, we address the source data. Here, what you're effectively doing is flagging or labeling the columns that come from your underlying import file. And again, you get visibility to that import file here at this phase of the process. And you're using the yellow labels towards the top to identify how the import process should perceive or use each of the different columns that are coming from your import file. Again, if you have set up your import file appropriately, this step of the process is very simple and easy. If not, there can be a little bit of drag and drop required, but again, we'll be teaching you how to use Scoreboard itself to create a properly formatted import file that should make this step of the process exceptionally easy. The third step of the setup of an import process in Connect is to define the destination organization. Here, what you're doing is pointing towards an empty organization that needs a scorecard structure defined. You'll see that there exist a couple of already existing organizations such as Mobile World Inc., the utility company for training that we reviewed earlier. In our case, on this screen capture, we see that the new empty organization is gray. That's your visual indication that that organization does not yet have a scorecard set up, and so that will be the destination of our entire scorecard structure import process. Once you click on it, you see at the bottom lower left corner that organization is now defined as the destination for this import process. Lastly, we'll move to the fourth and last step of creating a scorecard structure via Connect, which is mapping. Again, it's very simple in terms of creating a structure or a scorecard, because what we're doing is wholesale taking everything that is in our import file called the utility scorecard in yellow and mapping it to the ID of 362 and the new empty organization that has been set up within Scoreboard. Once you've set up the 4 steps of this import process via Connect, each of them will be colored blue. As you move through them one by one by one, they each get colored blue, but blue indicates, of course, a successful definition of any step in the overall process. So let's jump into a demonstration of actually creating a scorecard in Scoreboard via Connect. I'll again bring back up my browser, and I have 2 tabs open. The first is the one that we already employed to review the existing utility company for training scorecard that already exists, that will again be replicating and populating. The second tab again is pointing presently at that exact same environment. And as we discussed earlier, all I need to do to access Connect is to provide a / and connect at the end, bad typing, but at the end of that URL for the Scoreboard environment. Which brings me to the Connect login page. I provide an appropriate username and password to get authenticated, click Submit, and I'm brought to the Connect homepage. This is again exactly what we saw in the screen capture I shared with you earlier, an empty, pristine environment of Connect where no import processes presently exist. And again, we're working at this point with just Excel import files. We'll click on the Create New Import button to open Connect and the Edit Import process that we saw earlier, and we'll click Basic Information. Again, in this case, we need to create or provide a name, which is simply, we'll call it, create a scorecard. The data source, again, is going to be Excel or CSV. In this case, the import type is going to be create scorecard. And it is, of course, very important that you select the appropriate import type here for what you're desiring to do via Connect. I'll click create scorecard, and then I'll browse out and find the file that contains the information for the scorecard structure that I aspire to define or create within Scoreboard. In this case, I have on my desktop a couple of folders here, and I've got the structure import file that we saw earlier in my presentation. We'll select it. Because I've played with this before, I'll overwrite any existing files with the same name, and I'll click OK. So step 1 of the process is now colored blue, indicating that that is complete. We'll move on to step 2. which is to define the source data for this import process in Connect. Again, because we're working with a nicely formatted import file that has been set up appropriately with column names that map easily to the underlying import expectations for scorecards, key performance area, objectives, and so on, they've already been effectively automatically mapped. There may be a situation where, when you employ a certain import file to design a scorecard structure, things don't quite map automatically for you. So in this case, I dragged the KPI label, the yellow KPI label, away from column D, giving you a sense that potentially you may find that when you get to this phase of the process or this step of the process, you may have some columns from your import file that have not automatically been labeled appropriately. In those cases, you simply drag and drop the appropriate label over the top of the column within your spreadsheet or import file along the bottom. At this point, if we scroll across, you'll see that every column within our import file has been appropriately labeled, and we can click OK. Let's move on to the third step of the defining of this import process, which is the destination organizations step. Again, as we discussed earlier, we're looking to map this import into an empty organization, an organization that doesn't already have a scorecard in it. The Mobile World Inc., indicated as a blue, dark blue circle here, already has a scorecard. Utility company for training already has a scorecard. If I try clicking on them, they don't work as a destination. If I click on August 28 utility organization, however, you'll see that along the bottom it is now listed as the destination, the ID of 382, and the organization August 28 utility organization is understood to be the destination of this import process. I'll click OK. Moving to the last step of defining this process, we'll go to mapping. And again, as I discussed earlier, the mapping, when you're creating a scorecard, is about as simple as it can possibly be, where what this process is effectively doing is acknowledging that you're bringing in an import file which has been labeled and identified as utility scorecard. It's been set up appropriately back in the source phase of this process, and it's going to go to the it's going to map to the organization of August 28 utility organization, which again is a wide open empty organization. And I'll click OK. The 4 steps of our import process have now been defined. They're all presented in blue, and we can click Save. Now that this import process exists, it's a simple process of just running it. So out towards the right, under the Actions column, we'll click Run Now, and we'll run that import process to physically create the scorecard within our new August 28 utility organization. So to prove that that worked, I'll navigate back to the tab that has my Spider Strategy scoreboard, and I will refresh that scoreboard and will navigate to the organization called August 28 Utility Organization, which was a wide open, empty organization that did not previously have a scorecard. And I'll select it, and I see in here that we now have a utility scorecard with a financial KPI area, an underlying couple of objectives, and under each of those objectives are of course unique and specific KPIs. So this entire structure, again I'll click Expand All very quickly and just sort of scroll through from top to bottom, that this entire scorecard structure has been created via that import process that we just ran through Connect. So we have successfully created our scorecard. The next step will be to populate this scorecard with data for 1 month and for many months. Before we get there, I'll return to my presentation and give you a bit of an orientation to that phase of the overall scorecard creation and population process. So again, returning to our agenda, our third and last agenda item is to now use Connect and Excel import files to update a scorecard. Again, you'll see that the edit import phase of Connect is very similar. The one primary difference is that while you still move from left to right, there is now a schedule opportunity when you're updating a scorecard. When you were creating a scorecard, there was really no need to schedule the creation of a scorecard. But in terms of updating, there may potentially be opportunities where it's beneficial to schedule it for a given date, point in time, what have you. Let's again just quickly review the unique steps of that 5-step process. Again, the first one is to provide basic information about this import. Again, a name, what the data source is. Again, in this case, it'll be Excel. The import type, of course, in this case, we're going to be updating metric values, no longer creating the scorecard, but instead updating the values. And again, lastly, of course, pointing it to the file that contains the update information that you want to bring into your scoreboard scorecard. The second step of the process, again, is the source data. You'll notice that this is a bit simpler, we'll say, than it was when we were creating a scorecard. There also are some additional radio buttons at the top which you can employ to define where and how this import process should look to find date information, which is vitally important to that import process. When you're creating an import file, the 3 key things you need are some kind of a unique identifier to point the import file towards the appropriate destination. You need date information, and then of course you need actual values that should be imported into the scorecard. Step 3 of the process here, again, it's the destination organization step. Again, this is different than when we were creating a scorecard, because now a scorecard exists and we want to just make sure that we're pointing our import to the appropriate destination location. In this screen capture, I've opened up the entire utility scorecard, showing you the distinct KPI areas, the objectives, and a couple of the KPIs. So oftentimes you will be updating an entire scorecard top to bottom, but sometimes you might just be looking to update particular KPIs. So you can get very granular in terms of your destination selection here by just picking onesie-twosie distinct KPIs that you want to have as the destination of the import. Moving on to the 4th step is mapping. Again, it's not quite as simple as it was in terms of as compared to what we saw in creating a scorecard. But in this case, the idea is just to map elements that are coming, row by row elements that are coming from your import file into the appropriate location within the existing scorecard within Scoreboard. I'll again say that if you have set up your import file appropriately by ideally creating that import file out of Scoreboard, as I'll teach you to do in just a few minutes, that this phase of the process should be really quite painless and easy to do. Lastly, again, when you're updating a scorecard, should you desire, you can do scheduling of that import process. We'll cover that live in just a few minutes, but there are choices in terms of frequency on what days, what time, and even down to what time zone this schedule should be run. Scheduling is not typically employed when using Excel import files, because the Excel import files themselves by nature are static, so that you wouldn't necessarily want to be rerunning it time and time and time again to get the same data. If by chance you're going to be aspiring to do scheduling of data that comes from a database or a SOAP sort of data source, we will be covering that topic in our next month's training video around Connect. Okay, so having just given you the broad overview of the 5 steps, again, the blue means that any step in the process has been successfully defined. And let's now talk about those import files themselves. I've a couple times have mentioned or alluded to the idea of an appropriately formatted import file. There's a wonderful new feature in Scoreboard version 3.2 that makes it really easy for you to create appropriately formatted import files right from Scoreboard that you can then turn around, populate, and use via Connect to populate your scorecard in Scoreboard. So this is a view of an example for 1 month import file that can be generated by Scoreboard very easily through a simple 3-step wizard. And the idea is you take this file, and by clicking Download Import File in the lower right corner, you download it out to Excel. Within Excel, you populate that import file under, in this case, column D for the month of November 2017 with all of the unique and appropriate values for all of the different KPIs. You save that file and then point to it as your import file through Connect. That exact same concept can easily be conveyed to a larger time period, where what you need to do is when you first get Scoreboard set up, you can populate many time periods simultaneously by again generating an appropriately formatted import file again from Scoreboard, and just in this case basically expanding the time horizon that the import file should encompass, and then in the exact same way download that file into Excel, populate the import file with the values for all of the distinct months, and then turn around and upload this file into Scoreboard to populate your scorecard for, in this case, it's 13 months. And this, just so you know, this file and the one I showed you just a minute ago for 1 month are the files that we're going to be employing here in our demonstration of populating a scorecard in Scoreboard via Connect. So again, I'll leave my presentation here in PowerPoint and I'll navigate back into Scoreboard. So as you'll recall, we just recently created this utility scorecard, which is wonderfully structured, but it has no data for any month, for any time period. Everything is effectively light gray. There are no colors, no scores, no nothing right now. We want to populate this for 1 month, then we'll populate it for 13 more months. To do that, we need to create those appropriately formatted import files. To get that process started, you click on the Utility Scorecard on the left in the black navigation pane, and we're presently viewing the scorecard on the Overview tab. To create an import file, you start by clicking on the KPIs tab. And that's very important because once you're on the KPIs tab, if you go towards the upper right to the Send To export listing of where you can send information about this particular scorecard, in our newest version of the software, we now have at the very bottom a KPI value import file choice. I just bring up the importance of the tab because if you're on the Overview tab of your scorecard and go to Send To, you will not see the opportunity to create an import file or a structure file from this scorecard. You have to be on the more tabular KPIs view of the scorecard and then go to Send To, and again in this case create a KPI value import file. On the left in here you click on August 28 Utility Organization as the organization from which we're going to pull information to populate, and on the right I would recommend under the Cascade column turning on the opportunity to bring everything from the underlying August 28 Utility Organization's scorecard. We don't just want to populate one single row via our import file. We want everything from the scorecard to the KPI areas to the objectives to the measures. So with that said, we want to click on the Cascade and then click Next. We're going to define the time period that we'll create an import file for. And in this case, it will simply be November of 2017. I'll select the first date in November, and then I'll navigate, in this case, back. Bear with me a minute. I have to get back into 2017. And then the last date in November. So again, start date is November 1st, end date is November 30th of 2017. In this case, we're going to be using the most typical format, which is dates in columns. And that will give us an output just like the screen captures that I showed you earlier. If by any chance during your import process you are not only looking to impact values, populating the scorecard with values, but you also want to impact thresholds, change them from 1 month to another, you really have to change the format of the file so that you would have dates in rows. So you do have that choice as well. Again, in this class, for this time period, we're just focusing on the simple dates in columns approach to this import file, and we'll click Next. And voila, we now have visibility to an appropriately formatted import file that is ready to go for us to populate it under the November 1, 2017 column with actual values that we can then import via Connect into this scorecard. At this point, what we do is download the import file. And in my lower left corner of my screen, I see the August 28 utility Excel file is there and available to me. I'll open it up in Excel. I'll enable editing, and just to make things easier to view, I'll just expand a couple of these columns so that you can see them a little more easily. And obviously we have an organization column, we have an ID column, a KPI column, and in column D, a date column. And what we want to do is provide actual values for the month of November 2017 within this import file. Again, I won't subject you guys to watching me type information into that file, so we'll do a little, what I always call cooking show magic here, and I'll just do a quick copy and paste to populate in entirety that November 2017 column for all of our KPIs with appropriate values. Then I'll save this file, so I'll click File and Save As, and I'll save this file out to a folder that I can easily reference in just a few minutes when we actually use the file. And we'll just call this August 28 utility for just 1 month. And click Save. So that file is ready to go for us to use to populate our scorecard for one single month. While we're here still generating import files, let's also do the same to create another import file that contains actually 13 months worth of information. So it's effectively a redo of what we just did, where I'm still on the utility scorecard. I'm in the scorecards area, utility scorecards, looking at the KPIs tab. Again, go to the Send To button in the upper right. Again, we'll create a KPI value import file. Once again, we're pointing to the August 28 utility organization. Again, I do want to cascade from top to bottom and include everything that's in this scorecard within my import file. And this time, we'll expand the time frame from, let's see, we want to go to December of 2017. We'll start on the 1st of December 2017, and I've got 13 months of data that I know I have ready to go to update. So I'll just navigate out to the end of December 2018. So again, December 1st, 2017 through December 31st, 2018. Again, we're going to be creating this with dates in columns, and I'll click Next. And again, here is the result of that effort, where I have a nicely formatted, appropriately formatted import file that is ready to download and then populate with values or data that I can, in just a few minutes, upload or import into my scorecard. So bear with me just a minute here, folks, while I again just show you the result of that import file creation. Again, in this case, within Excel itself. Again, just to make things a little bit easier for everyone to see, I'll expand the columns. And once again, I'll populate this import file quite quickly and easily. Again, with what I'll call the cooking show magic, a little bit of copy and paste to get this populated without making you guys watch me type data or numbers in. And then once again, we'll save this. So File, Save As. Again, I'll just plop this onto my desktop, into our webinar folder and the Tuesday folder, and we'll just call this one Many Months. Many months. Okay, and then I'll click Save. So after that, I now have two import files raring and ready to go, one for 1 month, one for 13 months. So we'll get Excel out of the way, and we'll move back in to Connect to work to create two separate import processes. So back in Connect, I'll click on the Create New Import button and start again through the 5-step process. First, of course, basic information. I'll call this simply 1 month import. We are pulling again, of course, from an Excel or CSV file. The import type in this case is update metric values. Last time we were in here, we created a scorecard. This time we're updating metric values. I'll click Browse to browse out and point to the file that I want to employ, which comes from my Tuesday folder, and it was the one for 1 month, right? The 1 month file. And I'll click OK. We'll move to the second step of the process, which is the source data step. And again, this reflects what we saw. I showed you this earlier via a screen capture. But if you recall, when we were creating a scorecard from scratch, there were many more labels that really need to be applied to the import file so that the Connect process knew what to do with all of those myriad different Excel columns. In this case, what we really just need to do is make sure that the software understands which column should be employed as a unique identifier for every row in the import file, which it has already done, as you see here. And the reason it's been able to already identify column B as the metric ID or name is again because we provided it with that appropriately formatted import file that came straight from Scoreboard itself and the scorecard that we're going to be populating. The next is to help this import understand where can it find date information. You know, what time period should be updated with this, with all these values and all this information. Because of, again, the appropriate formatting of this file, the easiest and best way to do that is at the radio buttons at the top. The second one down is use a date header row for imports. I click on that and you see that row 1 of our import spreadsheet, we'll call it, along the bottom has now been colored orange. So that is a visual indication that this process now understands that it should look to that row to find some kind of date information. And obviously it's going to find it under column D, where we have November 1st, 2017. Underneath that column then, of course, is where all the values for all of our KPIs are logged, and those are going to be pulled in and appropriately mapped, if you will, to all of the unique IDs. That's all we need to do to set this up. We'll go ahead and click OK, and we'll move to the third step of the process, which is the destination metrics. Again, this is a bit different than the last time we were here in Connect. You'll recall last time we were trying to point to an empty organization to create a scorecard. Now we're looking to point to an existing scorecard and make sure that the destination is defined appropriately. So we'll click on our August 28 utility organization. It opens up that organization and its scorecard and presents the scorecard on the right. Again, I can navigate into this scorecard at great detail. I can open the KPI areas, I can open the objectives, and I can go all the way down to the KPI level if what I'm trying to do here is just uniquely populate 1 or 2 specific KPIs via this import process. In our case, we're looking to populate the entire scorecard from top to bottom. So I'll click on the utility scorecard at the top, and you see that on the lower half or towards the lower left corner of your screen, all of the names and the IDs for all of the KPIs throughout the entire August 28 utility organization have been listed at the bottom as destination locations for our import process. At this point, we can click OK on step 3. And we'll move to step 4, again, which is mapping. Again, as compared to the last time we were here in the mapping step of using Connect, last time it was one simple import file going to one empty organization. Now what you'll see this Connect process has had the intelligence to do is to look at that metric ID or name column that we mapped back in step 2 and say, all right, I'm going to look for values there, and I'm going to try and point them to existing similar or identical existing values within the scorecard. And it has achieved that across the board from top to bottom. Again, because we created our import file from the scorecard in Scoreboard, it makes the setup of this import extremely easy. If by chance you created an import file that you're trying to use in this fashion that didn't come from the scorecard itself, there may be times where the mapping was not achieved appropriately. So in this case, all I've done is I dragged the very first yellow ID value of 1818. I dragged it over to the left. So that is leaving the ID of 1818 over on the right without anything coming into it. So if that happens to be the case and you find yourself where you have unused elements on the left that should be mapped to something in the scorecard on the right, it's a simple drag and drop process, just like I showed you earlier, where you can drag and drop column labels back in step 2. Same idea here. You can drag and drop unused elements to their appropriate or desired destination on the right. So that takes care of the mapping step of the process. I'll click OK. Again, we don't need to schedule this. Again, being an Excel import process, you're not going to typically schedule an Excel import process, but you do have the opportunity to do so by clicking Schedule. And just to give you a live look at the scheduling phase or step of this process, you simply change it from Do Not Schedule to New Schedule, and then employ all of the various fields here to set up your frequency as appropriate on the first day or the second or fifth or whenever, what hour, what minute, AM or PM, and even precision about the time zone when you want this scheduled process to occur. In our case here, for training purposes, we don't need to schedule this process. We'll do it live in just a minute, so I'll just leave it Do Not Schedule, and I'll click OK. So this entire setup of this Connect import process is complete. I see and know that schedule is gray, but that's okay. That's not a problem. Just because it's not blue doesn't mean it hasn't been addressed. We are just choosing not to schedule it. And at this point, we can click Save. And that entire import process is ready to go. It's presented to me back in the Connect homepage, and I can click Run Now to actually run that import process. It should, in this case, just take a matter of a couple seconds. Again, thankfully, I get a success in green result. Before I leave this real quickly, if an import process doesn't work, you'll of course get a red failed indication under the status column. You also might get a partial, it's yellow, and a partial success indicator. If you want to know any details about something, the status of something, you can simply click on it and it will give you an import log representation. When it's a successful import, there's not a whole lot to show. It just tells you the date and time when it successfully ran. If you get a partial success, it'll give you some details about what didn't work. And if you get a failed result, it'll give you details about what failed and why it failed, and you can go back and try and make appropriate corrections. Okay, so having uploaded 1 month's worth of values or data into our Scoreboard scorecard, let's go take a look at that. Let's see the proof in the pudding. Show me those values in my scorecard. So again, we're working with the August 28 utility organization. I'm going to just refresh my browser that is presenting me with Scoreboard. And again, we set this up, or we did our import for November of 2017. So I'll navigate to November of 2017. I'll change our view of this to the Overview tab. And I see that from scorecard level down to KPI area, down to objectives, and even down to unique KPIs. They are now colored, they're scored, it reflects the values that we imported. Graphically on the right, under the historical performance chart, there's not a whole heck of a lot to see because we just have 1 month's worth of values. But when you look at November of 2017, we are reflecting that all of those values have been imported. They are again being presented, they're being scored and colored. So great success there to import values for 1 month. Let's now return to Connect quickly and do the same thing for 13 months worth of data from December 2017 to December 2018 using that second import file that we created. So I'll do this quite quickly here. Hopefully you guys understand the process at this point in time, but I'll click Basic Information, and again I'll just call this one Many Months. many months import. And again, it is using an Excel data source. The import type again is updating metric values. And in this case, of course, we need to point out to the import file that has many months worth of data that we recently created. Again, I'll click overwrite. You probably won't have to often click the overwrite button, but having used that file previously, it might be helpful to do that. I'll click on the source data button. Again, just like we saw earlier, same presentation of effectively your spreadsheet, and you just need to help it understand where it should find date information. It already has identified the metric ID and name that it will use to uniquely, if you will, map import values to scorecard destination locations. And once again, towards the top, we simply need to click Use a Date Header row for imports. We'll click OK. We'll move to the third step of destination metrics. Once again, our destination is within the August 28 utility organization, and we are again going to be populating the entire utility scorecard from top to bottom. So I'll just click on utility scorecard on the right. Along the bottom, again, you see the presentation of all of the KPIs within that entire scorecard, which are now expected to be the destinations. And I'll click OK. Moving to mapping. Once again, thanks to the appropriate formatting of our import file and the mapping of IDs to IDs, we really don't need to do anything here except just confirm that everything looks okay, and we'll click OK. Once again, I'm not going to be scheduling this, so I'm going to click just save in the upper right corner. And we'd like to run this. Let's get that scorecard populated with 13 months of value. So I'll click Run Now. It will run that import process via Connect. And again, we get a successful result. I'll navigate back into our Scoreboard scorecard for the August 28 utility organization. Again, I'll just refresh my browser, and let's see what we have over time. So we start in November 2017 and just navigate forward using the upper right time or month chevrons to navigate across time. And I see for this particular KPI, we do in fact have values and scores and colors for all 13 months from December, actually 14 in this case, from November of 2017 all the way through December of 2018. And again, those unique KPI scores and values are being rolled up to the objective level. The scores are being rolled up, then up to the KPI area, where again the scores are being rolled up further, and again to the highest level of the entire utility scorecard, which again has a score. So we have successfully populated that scorecard with 14 months of data. I'm going to jump back to my presentation and just review with you what we've done today on this webinar. We gave you a brief and broad introduction to Connect. What is it? Who uses it? When, why, and how? We used Connect and an Excel import file to create a scorecard within Scoreboard. And then we used Connect and a couple different Excel import files to update that scorecard in Scoreboard. I would like to ask you to, again, please join us in September next month for our next webinar. In that case, we again are going to be addressing Connect, and we'll be discussing using it to access other data sources beyond Excel and to automate data imports. I very much hope that this lesson has been helpful to you. Thank you very much for attending. And again, please feel free to contact me personally, Tom Keating, anytime at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com, or you can feel free to use our education department email at learn@spiderstrategies.com. Thank you again for your time and attention, and have a great rest of your day.